Well, welcome. Thanks for being here today. Today we have a former UMD student, Nathan Paul, who was a communication and political science major here at UMD. He is here today to talk to us about learning multiple languages. He has experience with studying Spanish, German, Russian, and Chinese. He lived in China for 10 years, has recently returned, and we'll turn it over to Nathan, and he'll give us all kinds of tips on learning multiple languages. We're counting on him.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, as Cindy is so kindly introduced, my name is Nate, and I really am passionate about languages. So today I just want to give you guys some ideas on how you can possibly expand your language learning abilities, give you some tips and ideas, things that I've used over the years. But I've got to preface this by saying I am not a linguist, I do not have a PhD, I'm not a professor, I am just some guy who happens to like languages, and I just want to share with you the things that have worked for me in the past and the things that haven't. So, that being said, you gotta be a special kind of crazy to learn multiple languages, and I imagine you're probably gonna think that this presentation is gonna look something like this. So, cut me some slack, open your minds, and I do believe that everyone in here has the potential to learn any language that they choose. I don't think there's any special talent to it. I think that it's innate. I do believe that every human does have the ability to it if they're, usually healthy. And I don't believe in this, like, you have a knack for it. I think it's just a matter of interest. So, all right, why listen to me? Okay, so here's me sitting in China. This was in 2014. My friend stole this picture of me trying to get through my Chinese exam. I don't remember which one it was. I think it was the third semester. And as you can see, it's a disaster. But that's the old me. And I wasn't the greatest student in the world. And hopefully things have changed, but you know what? There's always room for improvement. So let's talk about what I have done. So, all right. I could say I've studied Chinese for 10 years, 11 years, but that's not really accurate because years are too big of a measurement for us to actually get anything useful out of it, right? So what I did instead was I sat down and calculated all the class hours I've had in each language, and I made this chart. So my Spanish total hours is 350 hours. My German is 413 hours. I've done Chinese for almost, 1,200 hours. And I've got Russian for around 400 hours. And a lot of it depends on where the training is taking place, the quality of the training, and also the quality of the student. So you can see that there's a variety in places where I've done this. So it's high school. I did 3 years of Spanish just in high school. I did a semester in Germany, 2 years at UMD, and Chinese I did the most. I did 2 years in China, 1 year at UMD, and some time in Taiwan. And I've done 2.5 months in Russia and a lot of online courses. So that's how those numbers come up. But also, I've gotten older over the years. So I've gotten more dedicated. I'll tell you this, for example, Cindy has said, I've studied Spanish. If you asked me to speak Spanish to you right now, I probably couldn't. Maybe some simple stuff. But let me get into that later, okay? This is a map of the world language, the difficulty of world languages according to the U.S. Foreign Service Institute for Foreign Languages. And to maybe make this a little bit clearer because it's kind of small, you can see up here we got England in the blue up at the top corner. Like we see, this is Eurasia. It's kind of tilted a little bit odd to show everything, but you got your these categories here. The closer it is to England, the easier it is for generally English speakers. And as we get farther away, this is just a trend, I'm just saying, but as it gets farther away, it generally gets more difficult as people and cultures and civilizations have developed different ways of communicating. Which means that if you're going to learn something like Chinese or Japanese, it's going to be an investment. For example, if you look at Chinese, it's a categories 5, which puts it at 2,200 hours, right? Japanese is even more than this. But there's a lot of caveats I got to say about this. Before I get into that, let's just take a look at where I'm at. So just so you all are clear what my language levels supposedly are. And again, this is just an arbitrary measurement. There's a lot of factors that go into this, but if you're a native English speaker and you want to start from scratch, this is what you're looking at, okay? So, boom. I am 280 hours short on Spanish, 337 hours short in German, almost 1,000 short in Chinese, and another 700 short in Russian. Yay. That's a lot of work. But again, a lot of this depends on your time in the classroom, right? I mean, all these hours that they've discussed here are about your time in the classroom. It doesn't talk about what you do outside of the classroom. So, one, we got to think about how we can get the most bang for our buck, so to speak. How can we get the most language learning for, one, the lowest price, and two, the best time investment. All right, now I don't have any magic hacks, but I have ways of inspiring myself, at least, to stay engaged. All right, here's a big myth. English speakers are bad at foreign languages because they're relatively isolated, right? England's an island. The USA is not an island, but it's only got one border with, well, 2 borders, but it's got Canada, which speaks mostly English. You got French in the east, and you got Mexico, right? Australia is also an island, right? And we often have this stereotype in general that since we don't encounter foreign languages, we're just bad at them. Or even worse yet, there's some sort of just something wrong with our culture, like we can't do it. But this is utter nonsense. The book I have pictured here is this book I read very recently. I love it. It's one of my favorite books. It's called Alum of Language. And he takes this argument and turns it on its head. English speakers are actually in a really, really great place to learn foreign languages. Why? Well, English is the European hybrid. So we got a picture here of William the Conqueror, who he brought, oh, excuse me, I couldn't know that myself. English is a Germanic language. I put the word was because a lot of English has changed. However, English is definitely got its deepest roots in the Germanic language family. So that means that English is very closely related to the Germanic languages of Europe. German, Dutch, the Scandinavian languages. But a lot of this changed. In 1066, the Normans conquered England, and a lot of French words were introduced into English. And today, I couldn't tell you the exact numbers, but I believe it's something like 50-60% of the words that we use every day are of French origin. So, what does this mean? How can we use this to our advantage? Well, you actually know a lot more German and French, and you actually know a lot more about the other European languages than you think. Not all of them, but a lot of them. Let me give you an example, and I hope this video works. It didn't work in the last class, so I'll have to pull it up on the USB. Okay, let's take a look.
You know more French than you think. You don't believe me? I know you will be a little skeptical. Let's do a little test and you will see what I mean.
By the way, oh, sorry. Screwed up. Is anyone studying French in here? Because then you're cheating. Let's see how much you can do. Okay, well, let's see how accurate we are at guessing it, because you can check us.
You know more French than you think. You don't believe me? I know you will be a little skeptical. Let's do a little test and you will see what I mean. I'm confident that by the end of this short video, you will understand an entire paragraph in French. Let's start with some word association to train your ear. Couleur, acteur, inventeur. How about artiste, dentiste, journaliste, et musicien, politicien, cinéma, chocolat. Now, let's move on to some sentences. Le journaliste présente un programme très intéressant à la télévision. Leonardo da Vinci était un inventeur, musicien et artiste. Marie a une passion pour le cinéma américain et le chocolat suisse. And now, you're ready for the paragraph.
L'inventeur a passé toute la nuit dans le laboratoire. Finalement, il a créé une machine miraculeuse, une invention extraordinaire. Il a inventé une machine capable de filtrer tous les polluants dans l'air pour toutes les générations futures. Pour ses recherches, il a reçu le prix Nobel lors d'une cérémonie officielle.
Hey, how was that? Sorry, I jumped ahead there. I didn't thought it was going to stop, but what does it say? Could you understand it? Maybe. Okay, as a native English speaker, it's pretty easy to understand. I believe that these things are happening around us more than we think. But French is easy, right? Can this idea be extrapolated? Well, okay. There is no magic bullet. There's no silver bullet that's going to fix all your language problems. But if we start looking at where languages come from, we can start to see that actually there's a lot more that's just beyond our immediate recognition than we realize. And when you start becoming conscientious of how close other languages actually are to your own, you start to realize that actually you passively can absorb a lot around you. So I got a picture here of this very complicated map of the Indo-European language tree, which I guess is not much of a secret if you're big into languages, but when I was here at UMD, I didn't know much about this topic. So I'll just break it down quick. The Indo-European language was a language that we don't really know if it existed or not, but we got pretty solid theory that it did exist in Europe. And this language has spread out and it's been kind of the origin of a lot of languages that we have today. So for example, we can see on this tree, I don't want to get too far away from the microphone, we have the Germanic family, which I've talked about, and we can see that English is up here. That's where we live, right? We have this Slavic family, where we have Russian, we have Bulgarian, we have Slovenian, we have Latin over here with Romanian, French, Italian, Spanish. We have the Britannic languages such as Scottish and Irish. We have the languages even in India, right? We have Hindi, Majarati, Gujarati, lots of languages that are still connected on some level. So I know it's distant. I know it's almost so distant that it feels like it's unusable, but really, there's a lot that we can find if we just start to recognize that a lot of languages are using the same structures and patterns that we're using in our own language. So I'll give you a really obvious example here. We're just looking at the language family of the Latin languages, the majority Latin languages. There's more than this, but let's take a look at how similar the vocabulary really is, right? We have English, accident, and French. I don't know French. I can't speak French, but I can guess the meaning right from it. Now, it might be a false cognate, but you could still make a pretty accurate guess on what it means by just observing how similar they are. Okay, Italian, Spanish, el caso. Well, a case, an accident, there's connections to it, right? I'm not going to go through all of these, but you can see at least a lot of vocabulary is right there at your fingertips. You just probably didn't recognize it. Maybe you have. If you have, you're ahead of me, because I did not discover this until, I don't know, relatively recently. I've often just said, okay, other languages are distractions, don't look at them. But I actually believe that's false. I do believe that the more you look at other languages, the easier it is for you to learn your target language. Now, I'll go back to that in a bit, that concept. But let's take a look at this on the Germanic side. Now, actually, this chart is limiting, because I wish I would have had more over here. I would have been able to show Norwegian and Swedish as well, which is in the book that I brought. But lots of the words, again, are pretty much the same, right? Like bread, brot, das Brot, right? We got Butter's basically the same. Kitchen's basically the same. Beer is the same. There's lots of words that you can already find, and I think that there's, well, I feel like this is just the beginning of it, right? This is just the tip of the iceberg. But this is something that probably is a little bit obvious to you, right? You probably already know quite a bit of Spanish. You've already encountered it in your life quite a bit, so it's not this shocking. But it goes beyond this. Did you know that the Asian languages are also quite connected this way? Let's take a look.
Japan,
日本、日本、日本、
China,
中国、中国、中国、
Korea,
韓国、韓国、韓国、
nation,
国家、国家、国家、
capital,
首都、首都、首都、
Chinese character,
漢字、漢字、漢字、
temperature,
温度、温度、温度、
beautiful woman,
毕竟、美人、美、
surface of the water,
水面、水面、水面、
gratitude,
感謝、感謝、感謝、
silence,
沈黙、沉默、沈黙、
goal,
目標、目標、目標、
loneliness,
孤独、孤独、孤独、
time hour,
時間、時間、時間、
school,
学校、學校、학교、
advertisement,
広告、廣告、廣告。
enough,
Yeah, that is enough. Okay, well, it gives you an idea, right? There's actually a lot more there than you realize. And I hope that it gives you a bit of optimism. Okay, so again, another thing that me as a younger student didn't realize is how similar we make sounds. For example, one of the student things I used to do in China is that students would really struggle to say the letter V. They'd say, I very much, right? Because they don't have the sound. So I would say, okay, make an F. Actually, you know what, everyone, you can do this if you want. Put your hand on your neck and go, you don't feel anything. Now say a V. Right? It's activating your vocal cords. Now, I used to do this with the kids. I'd tell them pretend to be the bumblebee, right? But this carries over, right? Right? T's become D's or vice versa. Once you start to realize that these sounds can be somewhat moved around, you start to realize that actually there's a lot of things that are in common. So for example, if we look at Old English, thou, thine. In German, to this day, it's still du and dein. right? It's not out of our grasp. We have English thing, German Ding. We have kind of an interesting one. If you look at language history, I think that you really can unlock a lot of secrets. A lot of cases, English W's did not transfer into French. So a lot of English words that have W's are morphed, or at least their equivalent in French is a G, right? So in English we have the word war, and in French, you can correct my pronunciation, but it's something along the lines of guerre. Yeah? And this is also where we get the word like guerrilla warfare, right? We can see the same thing happening with the word spice, and in French it's épice, right? Something like that. I don't speak French. It's an ambition of mine. So I'm just giving you some hacks that you can use to start making sense of texts, right? This system also works for Chinese. I am really shocked by the amount of Japanese I can at least get an educated guess about if I can read it. I've learned hiragana and katakana, so I can kind of do the phonetics around it, and I can read the kanji, because I've already studied Chinese. Is Japanese really 2,000 plus hours away anymore? I don't know. But my point is that there's a lot more around you that it's really in reach. You just often don't think about it, at least for me. Now, once you start to realize where these letters and these sounds are articulated, it becomes much easier for you to figure out your pronunciation and how other people pronounce the differences. So I won't go too much into this, but this is a map of where the sounds are produced, at least in English. And we can see that, for example, comes from your lips. You can feel the movement, right? You can see the H and the glottal stop here, the is engaging your vocal cords. I don't really know the anatomy of the mouth super well, but you can make all your consonants with the use of your lips, your tongue, and whether your vocal cords are engaged. So that pretty much covers all the sounds you can make. Your mouth is doing one of these things to make any type of sound. What if you're not engaging any of those things? Well, then you have a vowel. A, O, E, right? So at least one thing if I could do it again and shave hours off of my study time, I would master this IPA chart. I would master the mapping of where the sounds come from. I would do this first as well, because you don't want to start off with a bad accent. You want to start to try and refine your accent as soon as possible so you don't learn bad habits. So I encourage everyone here to learn the IPA. Now, you probably have learned it in China, right? In school you've had this? No? I find a lot of Chinese students have had this. I've never encountered this while I've studied languages. At least, if I have, I was a bad student and didn't pay attention. But when I was in Asia, I found that this thing was everywhere, and actually it's super useful. You can learn how to use your mouth to make pretty much every sound that exists. Now this, I think, is just this is just for English. But you can find much bigger ones that will precisely articulate every sound you want to make in whatever language you want to learn. You just do a little Google search, but you can do it. I found these for German, I found them for Russian, I found them for Chinese. I'm not the best user of this system yet. I'm still struggling with it a bit, but I can see real value here, and I'm definitely incorporating this into what I learn now. Every time I learn a new word, I try to write down the International Phonetic Alphabet System. So, I highly recommend this. I don't think it takes too long to get used to. It's just something that you gotta get into your routine. Right, so let's talk about etymology. Etymology is the history of words. I love this. So we have a real simple etymology here of Chinese characters, and these are pretty obvious ones. Those who've learned anything about some of the Asian languages, they probably have already seen this before, because these are maybe the most accessible ones. You can see how a sun has eventually turned into the character for sun, which is also the first character in the Japanese name. Japan in Chinese, Ruben, means the origin of the sun. We see the same happening for moon and tree and mountain and water, field, door. These are very simple ones. This is something you probably learn in your first semester of Chinese. And And they're great. I love them. It's super fascinating for me. But there are limitations. Eventually you're going to start to find characters where you have to just learn them. There's no little secret map. It's not obvious what they are right away. All right, so this one. Meow. Did I get it right? It means bird. You probably can't tell it's supposed to be a bird because, I don't know, you have to use your imagination. But if you combine it with our character, mountain, you get Dao. You have a mountain down here and the bird on top, right? Mountain and bird. Now, what is a place where a bird's on the mountain? It's an island. I know, it's a little bit strange to think about it that way, but once you start to see that image, it becomes much easier to remember what this is. It's also part of the name of the city I studied in, Qingdao, right? The Green Island. That's what it means. But anyway, so breaking things down into their roots really helps. Now, this might not exactly, I'll give you another example. Okay, we got the Gugong, the Forbidden City, and we have on the front here, 中华人民共和国万岁，世界人民大团结万岁. So it means we have the People's Republic of China, live forever, and the world unite for 1,000 years, 10,000 years. But maybe these characters don't immediately give you their meaning, right? And that's normal. Let's at least take one look at etymology here. We got the same one, Ming, Ren Ming, right? These characters here and here. I'll give you an image that you can't forget. This is Ming, and I have an app on my phone that does the characters, right? You can draw it on there and it'll tell you all about the history. And the history will tell you so much. Right here. I apologize for people if you feel a bit squeamish, but a lot of Chinese characters come from pretty gruesome history. Ming depicts a person getting poked in the eye with a sharp object, representing the original meaning slave. This is a common punishment for slaves. Now, the word doesn't mean slave anymore. It means just common people. But I'll tell you what, now that you see an eye with a stick in it, it makes remembering this a lot easier. I do this for every character I find. I try to find as deep of an etymology as I can, whatever story I can to keep that thing in my head. And you can do the same for English words. You can go back to English words and look at their history about, well, you can do it for any language, really. But the further back you go, the more you start to realize, actually, one, a lot of the stuff that we're saying in our own language isn't completely random noises, but two, a lot of what other people are saying isn't random noises either. And once you start to hear the history of the ideas, things click. Now, again, I am not a linguist. I am not a professional. I am just some guy. Take everything I say with a grain of salt. But there are 4 aspects of language learning that I've discovered. In China, they usually break them down into 4 categories. There's writing, writing, listening, and speaking. And these arrows were supposed to be animated, but you have 2 levels. You got passive and active. Passive is what you're doing right now. You are not producing content or whatever. You're not producing information. You're just absorbing it. You're passively absorbing it. But here's the thing, is you'll be able to talk about it later if you want. Maybe that's maybe not the greatest analogy, but my point is that passive eventually can become active. If you have enough of an environment to give you that stimulus, then eventually your brain is pretty good at figuring out how to repeat it. Okay, we got a big problem with languages, forgetting, right? Here we are, this is a map of memory retention, and I don't have the source necessarily for this, but you can find these maps quite common on Google, whatever. The point is that when you first learn something, you learn it and you got it for 100%. But then it drops down to nothing within 3 days. But the second time you do it, it lasts longer. Right? And this goes on. Every time you encounter it, it stays longer. I've heard statistics saying that to master a Chinese character, you must encounter it 38 times. But that's not so hard to do when you're in an environment where they're around, right? Okay, I've used memory systems like flashcards and stuff, and they say that the best time to review things is just about when you're about to forget it. Like, you want to remember something like, what's the name of that actor in that movie? And you're like, don't tell me, it's Tom Hanks. And then when you remember, you get like a dose of dopamine. You're like, oh yeah, I got it. And your brain says, remember that, right? So the idea, at least from what I've read in some of these books, is that you should be reviewing right when you're about to forget. I used to be a big fan of this. I used to have stacks of flashcards and try to like manage my system. I'd have apps that would say, okay, you gotta review this now, you gotta review this now. And I did, but eventually I got really bored. It's not fun to do this. It's not fun to micromanage every little like bit of information you want to retain. And also you have a big question. What are you supposed to retain? Obviously whatever your teacher tells you, whatever is most commonly used, right? But after a while you start to say, oh, how can I say overtime in Chinese? How can I say leg of a chair in Chinese or something? I don't know, I'm just giving you examples, but you start to get lost in all the things you want to know and you lose direction. So I don't do this anymore. Instead, I've got a lot of different ways I create my own environment. I brought some books with. You can take a look at the things I use, the ways I try to like find different ways to attack whatever language I want to, well, attack's the wrong word, but what ways I want to approach and acquire what languages I'm seeking. Here's some ideas. You probably already have them, but maybe there's some up here that you don't know. Audiobooks, fantastic. You have the sound of the language, you have your brain engaged trying to figure out what those words mean. Video games, my God. Every video game, you can change the language. You have to interact with it. You have to do the things that it tells you to do. You are engaging in it, right? It's great. You can change the settings on your devices. That can be a little bit troublesome if you don't remember how to switch it back, but you can do it on all sorts of different things. One thing I really found interesting was Instagram actually is a really, really, really great way to just turn that time where you're looking at your phone when you're bored into a tool that's constantly giving you review. And it's fun. You got all sorts of attractive people giving you tips. It's great. And over here, I like writing things down. Here's a really messy journal that I'm sure this guy's going to be like, this guy's got really bad Chinese. But I do this. I try to write down, one, what I like to write about, but also, two, what I've learned in the language today. So I actually have stacks of these. I don't do it always in Chinese. I'll do it in Russian. I'll do it in German or something. And yeah, I'll make mistakes. There'll be grammar mistakes. But guess what? No one reads it but me. And I feel so good that in 6 months I can look back and be like, I don't do that anymore. You can literally see your growth. So do it, whatever you can to like try and switch your systems into whatever language you want to acquire. Now, okay, I talked about multiple languages, right? Because like you could do this for any language, and I'll get to that in a bit. But let's take a look here and just cautiously look at my Instagram feed. Where'd it go? I'll just show you just what's out there. There's so many teachers who are just providing stuff either because they enjoy it or they want you to join their classes. There's no problem with you just following them and just taking what you can. And who knows, maybe you will sign up for one of their classes. Very clear? We got a black box.
Up to you in French.
Oh my God.
C'est comme tu veux. C'est comme tu veux. Or c'est comme vous voulez.
Auflegen. Ich lege den Hörer auf.
That's
Ich
great.
habe den Hörer aufgelegt.
Yeah, they got like little things like this. They just give you tips on what you can do. I mean, I don't have all the ideas, but someone does. I don't know if they're always good advice, but there's no harm trying.
We don't say, guess what? You know what? We say, na 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 na.
Okay, well, maybe that one's not that useful, but hey, I mean, again, those things are part of language too. So, my point is, whenever you can get that stuff just in front of you, do it. Do it. Don't just shut your brain off and say, oh, I don't want to study now, because studying can be fun. Alright, going abroad. I spent a lot of time abroad, not always successfully. There's me in Xi'an, in China, with some of my friends. My advice, learn as much as you can before you go. When you're over there, you're going to be overwhelmed. You're going to have so many new sights and sounds and people to meet and places to go that it's going to be a distraction. It's very hard to find a balance between exploring a country and learning the language. Because you're going to want to see and do as much as you can, and you should. It's what you're there for. But a lot of people walk away, they don't learn any of the language, they don't learn any of the things that they went there to do. And I've been there. I studied abroad in Sweden. They had free Swedish classes, and I said, nah, I don't need to learn, it's too hard. And I didn't, and I kicked myself for that. Don't do that. However, don't beat yourself up if you don't master the language while you're overseas. I say try to get as much as you can before you go, so you can really get as much as you can while you're there. But also while you're there, don't rule it out either. You know what I mean? Find that balance. Find that balance between exploring the place and exploring the language. Because I also think it would be a shame if you went to France, for example, and sat in a room and read French books all day instead of, going out to see France. And you might not have that level of French yet. You understand what I'm trying to say? So, one, don't beat yourself up if you go abroad and you don't learn as much as you planned to. But at the same time, don't discount it either. Don't say, oh, I'm just going to focus. Like, try to find that balance. That comfortable balance between exploring the language and exploring the culture. Okay, so I did mention this is about multiple languages. I really hate the word polyglot, which is supposed to be like the person who can speak multiple languages. That's the word for it. I call myself more like a language enthusiast because I don't necessarily have a grasp of languages that I would feel as comfortable to say that I'm fluent in. Fluency is a very slippery term for me. So instead, I'm just going to tell you my strategy, my patented language strategy, which I call the battleship strategy. Ta-da! Why? I have a fleet of languages, okay? My aircraft carrier is my Chinese, right? That's the one I focus the most on. I put my time in there. It's the hardest. If I'm going to get those 2,200 hours that they're saying, I'm studying this, I'm trying to do this, I prioritize it. That's tier one, that's the first thing. Because everything else you could say is a distraction, right? If you want to master a language, you shouldn't try to learn 50 of them. But if you enjoy it, you shouldn't deny yourself the pleasure of learning about other languages as well. I know that sounds a bit contradictory, which is why I have my fleet. My tier 1 here is Chinese, my tier 2 is Russian. I put time into Russian, I put a couple hours into Russian every day. Well, not every day. I do an hour of Russian, I have an online class, I do my homework, it's about 2 hours. I do Chinese about 2 hours, so they're maybe on the same level. I've learned German and Spanish before. I still am following things. I watch, for example, shows in Spanish whenever I can, especially shows I've already seen before. Like, for example, when I was a kid, I watched The Simpsons. I'm watching them again in Spanish, just because I already know the jokes. Now I can hear how they would say it. You know what I mean? I already know. I don't have to figure out the context. I put Ojibwe on here. It's an aspiration of mine. It's the lowest priority in my life at this moment, but it's there. It's a dream. And I'm just making this as an example. You can make your fleet as big or as small as you want. I think that it's probably a better idea to get really good at one language before moving on to others. However, at the same time, I do also think that it's a mistake to think other languages are a distraction. I think that if you just try to extract whatever you can from whatever you see, you will start building patterns in your brain that will allow you to access things you don't recognize. Okay, let me go on to the next example here. So, I got my fleet, but it's not there, and it's not done. Let's go down one level. Let's say we go to our Spanish ship. Okay, it's in the Romance languages. If I got a good sense for Spanish, and if I use those hacks that I've been talking about before, I might be able to dabble in things like French. I might be able to dabble in things like Romanian, or Italian, or Portuguese. I keep my priorities straight, but I don't ignore these languages either, right? And you can make whatever fleet you want. You can do the same thing for German. You can find that there's a lot of parallels between German and Swedish, for example, or Dutch and Afrikaans, or Danish and Norwegian. You can do it for the Russian languages, or the Slavic languages, excuse me. You've got many members in that family, lots of similar words, lots of similar grammar. You can do it for Turkic languages. You can do it for Chinese-based languages. Languages that use characters, I mean. So my point is that there really is no limit on what you can know, right? I would really recommend that you make a strategy on which ones you're going to make your kingship, your main language. And then after that, you can play around. But again, I've discovered that most of my life, I've just said, okay, it's French, I don't listen because I don't understand. Why? Why not try? Okay, it's just the map explaining how Chinese and the other languages are related, but we're running out of time, so I'm gonna skip this one. So life's good. Life's good. It's fun. There's so many things you can do. Let's take a look here. You're in the golden age, right? There's so many resources at your fingertips. The internet will give you whatever you want right now, right? You can find all the cool TV shows, you can find all the cool songs, you can find all the language guides you want, you can find all the native speakers you want. It's right there. It's something that's never existed before, and it's never been easier to learn a language, and it's going to keep getting easier. I believe learning is exponential. I don't believe that you learn a new word and you learn a new word like this. I believe you learn a new word and then you start to realize how it's connected to other words, and it's like a rocket ship. You just keep putting fuel into the rocket ship and boom, you start to see more of the language map around you. There are a ton of I'm a little ahead. There's a ton of loan words out there, right? The word for sandwich in Chinese is 三明治. You know that word. You already know how to say a sandwich in Chinese, right? How do you say cheese in Chinese? 芝士, cheese, right? It's close, right? Bus. 巴士, bus, right? It's a little bit of like, adjusting, but you've already got a lot of those words, and you don't have to relearn them, right? And I really do believe that learning a different language can help you learn your primary one, your primary target. If you want to learn Russian, seeing how the Russian words, like what Russian words exist in Polish, can really be a useful exercise. It can also teach you a lot about how those two cultures have interacted. You can see, for example, like English is the obvious case, we can see how many words in English came from French origin. For example, a lot of our formal words are French. Like intimate words, I forgive you, is something you say between your friends. It's a Germanic word. Vorgeben, yeah? And a pardon, that sounds so formal, like the government's giving to you, it's French. And you can start to see that this happens a lot. A lot of the formal words, I could go on a rant, but the point is you'll learn a lot about your own language or other languages if you look at other ones. So don't just shut them out like I've had for so long. And there's so many methods out there, so just try them all. You can find things that work for you, and if they don't, that's great. Move on to another one. There's so many strategies. Just have fun. Go play. So some final thoughts. My big point would be for you to try to develop your language intuition. What do I mean by that? Don't run to the dictionary for every word you don't know. Don't take a book that's in a foreign language and read a couple of words and say, go on to Google or something. Like, really, put your head in it. Like, I do this with Chinese. Even if I can not guess how the words are said, I can kind of guess the meaning from the words around it, and eventually it becomes faster and easier. So try to build your intuition how words work. And then get away from your training wheels. Get away from the tools that help you. Do that as often as you can, as much as you can. Stay positive, stay interested. You know, if you're bored with something, don't do it. Move on to something else. Just find a new way to approach your goal. This is, I find, very easy for me, but if it's something you're struggling with your studies, your language studies, try a different approach. Try to find some show or something that you like and change it into whatever target language is that you're seeking. Apply yourself as much as you can. Yeah, you're gonna get tired. We all do. You can't be on all the time absorbing everything. But also, whenever you notice yourself not paying attention, say, hey, whoa, they're talking, like, try to find the words that you can, and eventually, you're gonna get an intuition for this. And celebrate every victory. You know, there's nobody you're competing against. The only person you're competing against is who you were yesterday. Right? That's why those journals are so great. You can see who you were yesterday. And you can see that you're better. And you can say, okay, I got that grammar right. I got that verb ending correct. Yes, that is something. And if you celebrate that and you record that, you're going to start to find that you're pretty good at this. So, all right, I'm going to close this up. And you're going to have to forgive me, okay? This is classical Chinese, which is way different than modern Chinese. And me reading it in modern Chinese is going to be completely wrong because it's not how they said it when Confucius was alive. But we have Confucius here, and I'm under the pressure because he's looking at me. Okay. 譬如为山，为中一坤，是坤？ You don't know that one? Okay. 是物质业，比如平地，水康一坤金无万也。What does that mean? I couldn't read it either. I don't know. This is gibberish to me. It's like Latin. I can't read it. But it translates supposedly into, it doesn't matter how slowly you go, as long as you do not stop. So, just keep going. Just keep plugging away at it. Explore. Have fun. And if you feel like, I learned Spanish in high school, I'm too old, nonsense. Doesn't matter how slowly you go, as long as you don't stop. Thank you.